Hi, I'm Theo Gilbert-Jamison, and in this segment, we're focusing on valuing the differences and fostering an environment of diversity and inclusion in the workplace. So my first question is, what are some of the challenges that your team faces when it comes to diversity and inclusion? Could it be a lack of trust, disrespect, intolerance, or impatience for others who are different? Or is there simply just an unwillingness to value the differences in others, or an unwillingness to change stereotypes and mindsets? Well, if the answer is yes to any of these questions, the purpose of this video is to provide a clear understanding of what diversity and inclusion is and is not, to raise greater awareness and sensitivity to diversity issues that go well beyond the assumed categories, and to help you develop and implement an action plan that will foster a more inclusive, cohesive work environment. Now, with that said, we're specifically focusing on the business impact of diversity and inclusion, what's really happening in the workplace, and again, action steps to improve and create a culture that is inclusively diverse. And as I typically do, at the end of this session, you will be asked to consider how you will apply what you've learned. Specifically, what will you start, stop, and continue doing to ensure your work environment is one where everyone feels valued and appreciated. So let's get started. So when you think about diversity and inclusion, what words come to mind? Is it things like differences, individualism, value, belonging, or maybe collaboration, communication, culture, respect, or maybe even teamwork? Well, in the business world, diversity often refers to who gets hired, recruited, and promoted. It includes a range of traits, experiences, and characteristics that make up the workforce. On the other hand, inclusion refers to how people feel at work. Do employees feel valued, welcome, respected, and encouraged to fully participate in activities and decisions concerning their work? And the benefits of implementing diversity and inclusion initiatives are wide-ranged. There's literally no downside. From attracting the most qualified candidates to creating fully engaged employees with high job satisfaction, loyalty, and retention. So just why do some leaders balk at the mention of diversity and inclusion activities? Well, it often spurs from personal biases that they find difficult to let go of. So let's quickly look at some interesting facts. Currently, Millennials and Gen Z generations are the most diverse in history. And guess what? 67% of job seekers consider workplace diversity an important factor when considering employment opportunities. And why is this so? Well, it may be that 45% of American workers say that they have experienced some form of discrimination and/or harassment in the past year. Now, when it comes to identifying categories of diversity, people often think about race, gender, age, ethnicity, and religion. But within any given work environment, we're also diverse when it comes to education levels, socioeconomic status, communication styles, work-life balance, and so much more. So with that said, what makes your team diverse? In other words, what elements of diversity currently exist within your team or department? Now, when you think about diversity and inclusion in the workplace and valuing the differences, what's really happening? Well, diversity in the workplace is often rooted in the perceptions, stereotypes, and prejudices that we have about others. And there are 6 fundamental elements that impact our perceptions in the workplace. They're things like our family and our upbringing, our past and present experiences, those we associate with, our friends, our values and how we use them to make decisions. Values might include being trusting, honest, respectful, compassionate, or even the opposite. Then there's also the impact we allow the media to have on our thinking. and of course our religious beliefs. However, in order to foster an environment of diversity and inclusion, where we value the differences and see them as a positive, not a negative, we must rid ourselves of prejudices, unfounded biases, and stereotypes. So what would you say are barriers or obstacles to fostering inclusive diversity? And what can leaders and team members do to overcome them? Well, one thing that I want you to be aware of is unconscious or implicit bias. These are social stereotypes or beliefs that we often hold or form about certain groups of people. And while unintentional, unconscious or implicit biases can be deeply ingrained, universal, and positively or negatively influence our behavior. So what are some of the common misconceptions that you may have formed based on stereotypes? Now, another barrier that I want you to be aware of are microaggressions. These are underlying actions and behaviors that are hurtful, knowingly or unknowingly, that often create stress, create no sense of belonging, feel disrespectful, insulting, and invalidating. And there are 3 forms of microaggression that often occur in the workplace. They are microassaults, which are overt forms of discrimination, intentional acts, or deliberately posting racial or hurtful images or information. Then there are micro-insults, which are slight insults, even though the perpetrator may think it's a compliment. Or it could be simply being treated as if you are invisible. We call this dismissive behavior. And last, micro-invalidation, which are comments or actions that dismiss the experiences of historically disadvantaged group members. Or it can be exemplified in cultural insensitivity. So when you consider stereotypes you may have formed, barriers to inclusive diversity, and the different types of microaggression, where and how might you be fostering a culture of exclusion versus inclusion? So what are actions that we can immediately take to foster an environment of diversity and inclusion? Well, certainly it starts with valuing the differences, which is about positively recognizing, respecting, and appreciating the different perspectives and cultures that others bring to the table. And most of all, valuing the differences creates a work environment where people can and want to do their best. Next, it's important that we exemplify characteristics of an inclusive leader, which is someone who works to reduce unconscious biases because they are aware of how it can negatively affect others. Inclusive leaders also listen carefully, seeking first to understand, then be understood. They are open-minded, considerate, and respectful. They are role models, value the differences in opinions of others, and work tirelessly to create an environment where everyone feels that they are a valued contributor to the organization's success. And it's also important that we challenge stereotypes by treating everyone with respect, finding common ground by listening with an open mind, mixing it up by finding ways to collaborate and share perspectives, expecting more, challenging everyone to higher standards. And most of all, that we are generous in sharing the 5 universal needs, which are respect, knowledge, autonomy, collaboration, and most of all, recognition. When it comes to championing racial equity in the workplace, there are 7 simple ways that every leader can make a significant impact. But before we go over them, let's take a moment to review these additional statistics. So here's how each leader can make a significant impact by championing racial inequity in the workplace. 1, hear your employees out. Have the tough conversations. When racial injustices are prevalent in the news, and even when they're not, Allow your employees of all races an opportunity to express themselves and how they feel. 2, speak out against inequity. You see, as a leader, you can make a difference. And it's essential that inequity is always addressed. Reaffirm that discrimination of any form is not tolerated within your organization. Openly denounce racism and stand up for equity and justice. 3, diversify your leadership teams. You see, representation does matter. And if your leadership teams are currently underrepresented, actively work on changing that. 4, enforce pay parity. Simply put, people who do the same work should receive the same pay, whether they are Black, white, Asian, Latino, Native American, or any other race. 5, ensure your hiring process is fair and unbiased. You see, hiring has long been riddled with biases. So make the change by implementing hiring practices that limit and even remove biases. 6, implement diversity and inclusion training. Now, this might be a great start, but you probably still need to do a little more. Your workforce is made up of a variety of people, whether by gender, race, age, or any other demographic. So conduct ongoing diversity and inclusion training to help your team reduce prejudice and learn how to work together while embracing their differences. And finally, 7, institute anti-harassment, anti-discrimination standards. Emphasize your organization's commitment to racial equity through an anti-harassment, non-discrimination policy so each employee understands that racism will not be tolerated at any level. So as we begin to close this segment, here's a quick recap of what we covered. We started by defining diversity and its key elements. We talked about stereotypes, unconscious biases, and microaggressions, all that tend to hurt people. We also outlined some of the characteristics of an inclusive leader. And of course, we shared ways that each leader can champion racial equity. So how can you apply what you've learned? Where might areas of improvement exist? Well, here are a couple of examples. You might start by being more open to learning more about different cultures, people, and their ways of thinking. You might decide to stop allowing stereotypes to dictate your actions and behaviors toward others. And certainly, you might continue being a role model of excellence when it comes to valuing the differences and fostering an environment of diversity and inclusion in the workplace. So I'd like to leave you with this final quote from Mahatma Gandhi, who once said, "Be kind, say thanks, give credit." Empathize, read, learn, observe. To listen is to learn about yourself and others. Don't be afraid to say, "Help me understand," or "What can I do to help?" Each one of us must be the change we want to see in the world. Thanks so much for watching, and have a wonderful day.